My rich stepfamily made me sleep in the basement. From the outside, people thought I was living the dream. My mom had remarried a man who owned a mansion with rooms big enough to get lost in, cars that glistened like jewelry, and kids who strutted around in designer clothes as if they'd been born on a runway. Whenever people saw us together, they'd tell me how lucky I was. They'd gush about how glamorous my new life must be, how amazing it must feel to suddenly be part of a rich family. I smiled and nodded because what else could I do? Who would have believed the truth, that in a house with more bedrooms than people, I wasn't even allowed one of my own? Instead, they shoved me into the basement. That's right, the dark, cold basement with its concrete floor and smell of dampness that stuck to my clothes. While my step-siblings posted selfies from their chandelier-lit rooms, I curled up under thin blankets, listening to the muffled sounds of laughter and music drifting from above. My life was a split screen, luxury on top, misery at the bottom. People called our family picture perfect, but if anyone looked close enough, maybe they would have noticed the shadows under my forced smile, or the way I flinched when my stepfather wrapped his arm around me for family photos. Nobody asked questions, though. They saw wealth and assumed happiness, and I let them, because telling the truth felt useless. The real story was that every day, surrounded by luxury, I was treated like a stain they couldn't scrub out, something better hidden in the basement than seen next to their perfect image. And if you think that sounds dramatic, just wait until you hear what came next. When my dad died, it felt like the world fell out from under me. He wasn't just my parent, he was my safe place, the only person who made me feel completely seen. Losing him left this gaping hole that nothing could fill. My mom seemed just as broken at first, but only a year later she met someone new. His name was Richard, and to my mom, he was salvation. He was charming, successful, dripping with wealth. When she introduced me to him and his kids, she looked at me with pleading eyes, as if saying, "Please give this a chance." So I did. I told myself maybe this was the fresh start we both needed. I tried to ignore the knot in my chest when I first pulled up to his mansion, staring at a house so large it felt less like a home and more like its own country. Everything about it screamed power, spotless lawns, golden light spilling from giant windows, the kind of life people only dream about. A part of me even felt excited as I dragged my suitcase up the driveway. Maybe, finally, things would turn around. The reality slapped me faster than I could process. His children, my new step-siblings, looked me up and down like I was dirt on their shoes. They didn't even pretend to hide their disgust. When Richard gave me a stiff smile and said, "We don't have a room prepared for you upstairs just yet," I figured it was temporary. But then he pointed toward the narrow staircase leading down to the basement and added, "You'll be more comfortable there for now." I froze. "The basement?" I asked, thinking it had to be a joke. My step-siblings snickered behind him, whispering things I couldn't hear but definitely understood. My mom reached for my arm and squeezed it tightly, whispering, "It's only temporary. Don't make a scene." So I nodded, even though every part of me felt humiliated. When I opened the door and stepped down, reality twisted further. While their rooms upstairs had chandeliers and walk-in closets, mine was a drafty cement box with a single flickering light bulb. There was an old couch shoved against the wall and a stained rug that smelled of mildew. That was supposed to be my space. My step-siblings loomed at the top of the stairs, giggling. "Welcome home, basement girl," one of them sneered before slamming the door. That night, I cried quietly into my pillow, convincing myself my mom was right, that it was just temporary, that soon I'd have my own real room, but deep down, I already knew better. The basement wasn't an accident. It was their way of shoving me out of sight, making sure everyone who visited saw their picture-perfect family, while I stayed hidden underground. Life in that basement was like living in the belly of a beast. Above me were polished marble floors, glass chandeliers, and the constant scent of expensive candles burning in glossy holders. Below, I was surrounded by cracked concrete walls that trapped the musty odor of wet earth. Whenever I sneezed because of the mold creeping in the corners, my step-siblings laughed, saying, "Guess you're allergic to luxury." Their words dripped with cruelty, but in their twisted minds, they somehow believed I should be grateful for even having a roof over my head. My room was a rundown patch of space by the boiler, where the pipes groaned in the middle of the night, waking me every time they banged. My blankets were thin, and winter turned the basement into a refrigerator. I slept with 3 pairs of socks and an old hoodie pulled over my head, trying not to shiver loud enough for anyone to hear. There was a single cracked window that didn't really open, so the air always felt damp and heavy, clinging to my skin like an extra layer of grime. The contrast was unbearable. I'd carry trays of dishes upstairs after dinner, watching my step-siblings vanish into their pristine bedrooms with 4-poster beds and velvet curtains. I'd stand at their doors, catching glimpses of fluffy duvets and shelves stacked with gadgets, before being shoved back down the steps toward my corner of cold cement and old boxes. Each time, the message was loud and clear. They belonged in the light, and I belonged beneath them. What made it worse was the way they justified it. "You didn't pay for this house," one step-sibling sneered. "You're not even really part of us, you're just a guest." My stepfather would would nod with approval, telling me things like, "Be grateful. A lot of kids would kill to live here," as if the mansion itself negated the fact that I was being treated as less than human. Whenever guests came over, my mother instructed me to stay in the basement until the visitors left, lying to them about me being out with friends. I stopped correcting her after a while because fighting back only made the punishment worse. There were nights I lay in bed listening to the laughter and music echoing through the ceiling from their dinner parties. Their joy was a physical weight pressing down on me, smothering me with the reminder that I was never meant to be included. Sometimes I'd cover my ears, but it didn't block out the sound of their world upstairs, so polished and unattainable, while I decayed alone in the shadows. The basement became more than just a place I slept. It was a symbol, a cage designed to remind me of my status. I was the mistake they had to tolerate, the charity case, the intruder they shoved underground. Every inch of its damp darkness mirrored how unwanted I felt in that house. Living there wasn't just uncomfortable, it was degrading, humiliating, and soul-crushing. And yet, every time I thought I couldn't possibly sink lower, they always found another way to remind me. In their family hierarchy, I belonged at the very bottom. School was supposed to be the one place where I could breathe, a space away from the suffocating walls of the basement. But it turned out to be just another extension of my prison. My step-siblings made sure of that. From the very beginning, they poisoned my reputation, whispering little things into people's ears until rumors spread like wildfire. Before I even had the chance to build my own identity there, I was already labeled the basement girl. They wore sleek uniforms tailored to perfection, brand new sneakers, and backpacks that probably cost more than every outfit I owned combined. I, on the other hand, shuffled in with faded hand-me-downs and shoes so worn the soles bent when I walked. It didn't take long for classmates to start noticing the difference. "Why do you look like that if your family's rich?" someone joked once, loud enough for a crowd to laugh. I wanted to disappear right there. How could I explain that my family's wealth had nothing to do with me, that I was nothing more than an unwanted guest shoved underground? Teachers weren't much better. My step-siblings knew how to play the role of star children, flashing charming smiles, showing off projects they'd subtly taken credit for, projects I sometimes helped them with in secret, only for them to claim the glory. They were constantly praised, the pride of this school, so talented, so dedicated. Meanwhile, I rarely got more than a passing glance. If I raised my hand, I was overlooked. If I did well, it was treated like an anomaly not worth a second thought. The ridicule from other kids didn't take long to sting deeper. Once, when I dropped my books, a boy muttered, "Careful, basement girl, don't want to drag your germs up here with us." Everyone laughed while I scrambled to pick up my things, cheeks burning. My step-siblings stood by, smirking, feeding on my humiliation like it was their favorite meal. I tried hard to hide what was happening at home, but kids notice. They noticed my shabby clothes, my tired eyes, the way I never hosted friends. Some would probe with fake curiosity, "Why don't you have a room like them?" If I stayed quiet, they filled in the blanks with their own cruel versions. Each rumor spread thicker than the last, painting me as pitiful, weird, broken. Walking through the halls became the same as walking down the stairs at home. Everywhere I turned, I was reminded that I didn't belong. I'd thought school would give me a second chance at being normal, but instead, it magnified everything I hated about myself. The whispering, the favoritism, the laughter, every piece of it chipped away at me until I started believing maybe they were right. Maybe I was just the basement girl. At some point, something inside me snapped. Maybe it was after another brutal school day of taunts, or maybe it was hearing my step-siblings brag about their new furniture while I slept next to a rusty boiler. Whatever the reason, I decided I couldn't just sit and rot in that basement anymore. I didn't have much, but I started scrubbing the cracked floors with old rags until my knees ached. I gathered scraps, posters left behind in storage, a few fairy lights a friend gave me, and strung them around my corner. I found an old rug in the attic and dragged it down. It was frayed and smelled like dust, but it was better than bare cement. Piece by piece, I tried to carve something resembling a bedroom in a place clearly never meant to be one. For a little while, it gave me hope. At least it felt like I was taking control, even if it was of a cement box. But then my stepfather came down to get something from storage. He glanced at the lights, the posters, the rug I'd worked so hard to clean, and let out a laugh. "You making yourself comfortable down here? Good. Means you're finally accepting your place." His words hung in the damp air like poison. That basement wasn't my home. It was my prison, and decorating it was like gilding the bars of a cage. That night, I couldn't take it anymore. I climbed the steps and found my mom in the kitchen, carefully arranging flowers in a glass vase like she lived in some perfect magazine ad. My voice cracked as I blurted out, "Why do I have to sleep down there? Why can't I have a room like them?" Everyone already sees me as the freak who lives in the basement. My chest heaved with everything I'd been holding in, my eyes burning with tears I refused to blink away. For a split second, I thought she might pull me into her arms, tell me she was sorry, tell me I mattered. But she didn't. She froze, stiff as stone, then placed the vase down with trembling hands. "Don't start this, please," she murmured, keeping her voice low even though nobody else was in the room. "Things are complicated. Richard's trying his best. You don't know how much he's done for us." "Done for us?" I shot back. "He locked me in a basement like I'm some unwanted guest." My voice was loud now, too loud, and she pressed her finger to her lips, shushing me frantically. "You don't understand," she whispered. "You'll make things worse. Just bear with it a little longer, okay?" For me, that was the sharpest cut of all. She wasn't denying it. She wasn't fighting for me. She was asking me to keep suffering so she wouldn't have to. Her new husband's comfort was more important than my dignity. My own mom, the one person I thought I could count on, was telling me to settle into the basement like I belonged there. I stood there in silence, staring at her neat hair, her polished nails, her fragile smile that never reached her eyes. And in that moment, something in me broke again, sharper than all the laughter and taunts at school. Because humiliation from strangers and cruelty from step-siblings was one thing, but betrayal by my own mother was something else entirely. The basement was supposed to be my punishment, but it ended up being their biggest mistake. Down there, buried among rusted shelves and moth-eaten boxes, I found the truth they had worked so hard to bury. One evening, when the loneliness felt heavier than usual, I started digging through some old trunks shoved in the far corner. Most of it was junk, mildewed photo albums, broken toys, yellowed papers. But then I pulled out a locked metal box. Its key dangled right there on a brittle string, almost taut. "Ring me to open it." Inside were documents that made my stomach twist. At first, I thought they were just boring financial papers, but when I looked closely, I saw my father's name printed on them. My real dad, the one I thought had left us with nothing when he died. That's when it hit me. This wasn't Richard's fortune. It wasn't his shining mansion or his endless cash. Most of it came from my father. My dad had worked his entire life to give my mom and me security, to leave us safe in case anything happened to him. But instead of going to us, it had been swallowed up by Richard. The papers spelled it out like a sick joke. My dad's inheritance, his savings, even parts of his company shares had been transferred after he passed. Signed over, of course, by my mother, probably under pressure, maybe even manipulation. And Richard? He used that money to build the empire I was now trapped inside of. The same empire that reduced me to sleeping by a boiler in a cold, moldy basement. I wanted to scream. How could my mother stand by and let me freeze on concrete while she sipped wine under chandeliers bought with my dad's blood and sweat? How could she let me beg for a scrap of dignity in a house that should have been built, at least partly, for me? My step-siblings strutted around in designer shoes bought with money stolen from the father who used to carry me on his shoulders. I felt sick, like every brick in that house was a mockery of his memory. And then it got worse. As I pieced together the timeline, I realized Richard had swooped in right after my father's death, not just to comfort my grieving mom, but to seize everything my father left behind. Suddenly, all the puzzle pieces fit. The rich lifestyle, the mansion, the smug way my step-family looked at me. To them, I wasn't just an outsider. I was the inconvenient reminder of the man they'd leached their wealth from. That is why they shoved me in the basement, out of sight, out of mind. Later that week, I overheard Richard and my mom arguing behind a closed door. His voice was sharp. "She doesn't need to know. She should be grateful she has food and shelter. Don't start making her feel entitled." My mom's muffled reply broke me more than anything. "But it was her father's." Silence followed, and then Richard snapped, "It's mine now, and if she wants to stay here, she'll keep her mouth shut." I backed away from the door, shaking, my heart pounding in my ears. The house I thought was theirs was partly mine all along, built on foundations my dad laid, and yet I was the only one not allowed to enjoy a single ounce of it. That night, staring at the flickering bulb above my bed, I swore to myself, they could bury me in the basement, but they couldn't bury the truth, because now I had it, and it burned inside me like fire. For days after I uncovered the truth, I walked through that mansion on edge, my chest buzzing with a mix of anger and determination. I had something powerful now, knowledge. Even if I wasn't ready to shout it from the rooftops, I carried it like a shield. I stopped lowering my head when my step-siblings mocked me, and I started standing taller, even if my stomach churned with fear. For the first time, I let myself imagine something different, that maybe I wasn't powerless. But just when my spark began to flicker, they found a way to crush it. The ultimate betrayal came during one of Richard's precious family dinners, where half the extended relatives were invited to flaunt his so-called perfect household. I'd been dreading it, knowing I'd be paraded again, smiling on command. But I decided enough was enough. I told myself, this time, I won't pretend. I dressed simply, sat at the massive dining table, and kept my expression honest. No fake grin, no empty nods. It didn't take long for one of my step-siblings to notice. With a sly smirk, they leaned forward and said loudly, "Careful, everyone. She might not smile because basements don't exactly teach manners." The table erupted in awkward laughter. Blood rushed to my cheeks. My skin prickled with shame. I wanted to disappear under the table, but I clenched my fists, forcing myself not to cry. They weren't done. As wine glasses clinked and conversations picked up again, my step-sibling launched the final blow. "You know what's funny?" they said, raising their voice so the entire table quieted. "She acts like she belongs here, but she doesn't. This whole place was practically stolen from her dad, and she still sleeps under the pipes like a rat." Gasps swept across the room. My entire body went cold. My secret, my truth, ripped out of my hands and turned into their weapon. I searched the table desperately, my eyes locking with my mother's, silently begging her to defend me, to finally choose me. This was her moment to take my side. Instead, she looked away, pressing her lips into a thin, nervous line. Richard laughed, shaking his head. "Don't listen to her wild stories," he said smoothly, his voice dripping with control. "Teenagers make things up when they don't get their way. Don't worry, she's well taken care of." Laughter followed, relatives relaxing again, brushing it off as family drama not worth their concern. I felt the ground fall out from under me. My step-sibling shot me a smug glance that said, "Checkmate." My mom kept her eyes on her plate, refusing to even acknowledge me. And there I was, sitting at a table worth more than my father's legacy. With food in front of me I could barely swallow, treated like a liar in my own story. That night I curled up on my thin blanket in the basement, shaking from the humiliation. Every word replayed in my head, sharp and jagged. They had stripped me of my secret, twisted it into a weapon, and used it to paint me as delusional in front of everyone. And my mom, who knew the papers I'd found, who had once whispered, it was her father's, had let them bury me alive with silence. For the first time, I wondered if maybe they'd succeeded in breaking me. Maybe I was truly nothing more than basement girl, a ghost haunting the corners of a house stolen from my blood, my fire dimmed to embers. I lay there in the dark, tears burning down my cheeks, asking myself if I had the strength to keep fighting, or if this basement was where my story would end. That night, something inside me shifted. Lying on that thin mattress, replaying the laughter at the dinner table, I realized I couldn't spend another second being their joke, their scapegoat, their basement ghost. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my dad's name on those papers, saw the fortune he built turned against me, and I heard my mom's silence echoing louder than any insult. I knew then, if I stayed, they'd bury me alive in that basement. But if I left, even with nothing, at least the life would be mine. The breaking point came the next morning. My step-siblings were already at the table, eating the kind of breakfast spread you'd expect in a hotel. Richard lounged in his chair, smug as ever, and my mother hovered nearby, pretending everything was normal. I stood in the doorway, gripping my bag, heart pounding. "I'm done," I said. My voice shook at first, but then it steadied. "I'm not living in that basement anymore." They laughed, of course. My step-siblings snorted. "Where are you going to go, rat girl? Crawl into another hole?" Richard shook his head with fake pity. "You're being ungrateful. You have more here than most kids could dream of." That was it, the sentence he always used to keep me small. I slammed the bag on the table, the sound startling enough to silence the room. "None of this is yours," I snapped. "It was my father's. His money, his company, his sweat. You've been feeding off his work while shoving me into the dirt, and I've stayed quiet because I was scared, but not anymore." Oh, for the first time, I saw fear flicker across Richard's face. My step-siblings froze, eyes darting between us. My mom whispered my name, but I didn't let her stop me. "You've lied to everyone. You've built your perfect picture on something stolen. And if you think I'll keep living underground while you pretend to be kings upstairs, you're wrong." I walked to the front door with my bag slung over my shoulder. Richard barked at me to sit back down, that I didn't know what I was saying. My mom pleaded, "Please don't cause a scene. You'll regret this." But that was the difference now. I already regretted staying. So I threw the door open and stepped into the sunlight, my whole body shaking but my chest lighter than it had been in years. I didn't have a mansion waiting for me. I didn't even know where I'd sleep that night, but I had a friend, one of the few who cared enough to believe me, and her family didn't hesitate when I showed up on their porch. They gave me a warm meal and a couch, simple things, but to me, it felt like freedom wrapped in kindness. Later, I told them everything. I showed them the papers. I told them how my stepfamily mocked me, buried me, stole from me. Their outrage burned on my behalf, and word spread. Extended family and neighbors who once praised Richard started questioning his success. The cracks in his facade grew wider every day, and for once, I wasn't the one forced into the shadows. They were. Leaving that basement was the scariest thing I ever did, but also the most powerful. Because walking out wasn't just leaving a house, it was reclaiming my life. And for the first time, when I lifted my head to the sky, the smile that spread across my face belonged only to me. Breaking free wasn't neat or glamorous. It was messy, uncertain, and terrifying. For the first time, I had no basement to retreat to, but I also had no guarantees. I leapt on friends' couches, worked odd jobs to keep myself afloat, and fought the constant temptation to crawl back to what was familiar, even if it was poisonous. But every time I remembered the basement, that damp smell, the laughter above my head, the betrayal of being buried alive in luxury, I reminded myself I'd rather struggle in freedom than suffocate in chains. Slowly, piece by piece, I started to rebuild. A teacher who had once noticed my exhaustion exhaustion at school reached out when she heard what happened. She helped me apply for scholarships and gave me a stack of used books, telling me she believed I had a future. Her kindness felt foreign at first, almost uncomfortable, but I held on to it. And then my circle widened. Friends who had once teased me now admired me for standing up against people everyone else was too afraid to challenge. They saw strength in what I thought had made me weak, and their support became bricks in the foundation of my new life. I began to speak with more confidence. Even if my voice shook, I told people about what I went through, not to gain pity, but to shed the shame they'd buried me in. The more I spoke, the lighter I felt, like I was finally scrubbing away the lies they'd painted over me. My basement silence had become my loudest weapon. It wasn't easy. I stumbled plenty. Sometimes the loneliness came back sharp. Sometimes I questioned whether leaving had really been the right choice. But every small victory mattered. The first paycheck I earned on my own. The first night I slept without freezing. The first time someone told me, "You inspire me." Each moment reminded me I was no longer the girl in the shadows. Looking back, I realized my voice, once muted under floors of marble and laughter, had grown stronger because of that suffering. My pain became resilience. My humiliation sharpened into clarity, my survival into strength. The basement had been their attempt to bury me, but all it did was teach me how to rise from the ground up, unshakable, unstoppable, and fully my own. When I look back, now, I can almost laugh at the irony. My stepfamily thought they were burying me, locking me in a basement to keep me small, hidden, and ashamed. But in reality, they were planting me. Every cruel word, every slammed door, every icy night surrounded by cement only forced my roots to dig deeper until I was strong enough to push through the darkness. What was meant to destroy me ended up forging me. That's the part they'll never understand. They had the chandeliers, the luxury cars, the overflowing closets, but I had something they could never buy: resilience. Their mansion was built to look perfect, but it was hollow, a stage set propped on stolen foundations. And while they clung to appearances, I discovered the truth, that wealth and glitter mean nothing if it's built on cruelty, lies, and silence. Dignity is worth more than chandeliers. Truth is heavier than marble. For so long, I believed I was powerless because I lived in their shadows. But the day I left, I realized shadows can only exist when there's light. And that light was mine all along. The courage to stop smiling on command, the strength to walk away, the will to reclaim my life, even when starting with nothing. That kind of freedom feels better than any mansion ever could. So here's what I want you to remember. Sometimes life throws you underground, forces you into places that feel cold, damp, and endless. And when you're down there, it's so easy to believe you don't belong anywhere else. But being pushed into the dark doesn't mean you're meant to stay there. Sometimes it's the only way you learn how powerful it feels to rise. And now, when I smile, it isn't because someone ordered me to, it's because it's real.